it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I discovered a book in my library that seems to predict the deaths of my friends and family. Every single one of the predictions is coming to pass. By Apple Worm 25. It was a rainy Saturday morning and I could hear the rain tapping against my window. I looked up from my laptop and let out a soft sigh. The sound was somewhat annoying, yet also oddly soothing. I thought it might help me focus on the history essay I needed to finish for school. As I kept typing away on my laptop, I suddenly heard yelling and shouting. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and groaned quietly to myself. Not again. I got up from my bed and walked out of my room, heading down the hall and downstairs, where the yelling grew louder. As I turned the corner, I spotted my mum and older brother Mark in the living room, arguing about something. "Mom, I already told you I'm sorry. I should have called to let you know I'd be home late. I didn't realize the party would go on until 1 in the morning. And I've already told you that I don't like you or your brother being out that late. Something terrible could have happened to you. For heaven's sake, you could have been killed or kidnapped, Marcus." Mum and Mark continued their argument, clearly oblivious to my presence. I sighed softly, contemplating whether to just turn around and let them sort it out. Even though I was 21 and he was 23, Mum still treated us like children. She insisted we stay with her until we were both 30, which infuriated us. I felt a surge of frustration rising within me, and I cleared my throat as loudly as I could, causing Mum and Mark to stop arguing. They both turned and looked at me. "Oh my goodness, Daniel, I'm so sorry. Did we interrupt your studying?" Mum asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "Well, I've been attempting to study for more than an hour, but I can't concentrate with you two bickering like children." Mark's face flushed a deep red. I could tell he was embarrassed at the situation, yet he was still angry with Mum and wouldn't cease his argument until he'd expressed everything he wanted to say. "Oh, we're sorry, sweetheart. I'm just trying to explain to your brother that staying out late isn't wise," Mum said. I've always disliked that particular trait of Mom's. She's such a worrywart, if that's the right term, because she frets over everything, even the most trivial matters. "You know what, I'll just head to the library. Maybe I can finish my essay there, and hopefully there won't be anyone trying to tear each other apart." I nearly yelled the last part out of frustration as I turned and stormed back upstairs to my room to grab my things. As I shoved my laptop and notebook into my bag, I muttered under my breath about the constant fighting and how I felt treated like a child. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. I turned to see Mark leaning against the doorframe. I hadn't even noticed him come up behind me. Let me guess. Mum sent you up here to stop me from heading to the library," I remarked, glancing at him. "Yep, she believes it's a terrible idea for you to go outside in this rainstorm, because you might get sick or even struck by lightning," which is ridiculous, but, well, she wouldn't listen when I told her that. I rolled my eyes and plopped down on my bed, slipping on my shoes and ensuring the straps were snug, but not so tight that they were cutting into my feet. Honestly, I don't care what that worrywart or you think. I'm going to the library to finish my darn history essay without having to listen to another argument from either of you. Now, if you could do me a favor and tell Mum I'll be back before dinner, that'd be great," I retorted. Before my brother could respond, I got up, tossed my bag over my shoulder, and pushed past him, making my way downstairs to the main part of the house. Mum was there, clearly waiting for me. I raised my hand to signal that I didn't want to hear her lecture and assured her that I'd be home by dinner before stepping out onto the porch. The only sounds I could hear were the rain and the rumbling thunder. I let out a soft sigh, double-checking that my bag was securely closed, then pulled up my hoodie and set off toward the city library. Well, who would have thought a library would be open on a weekend? Well, after a few minutes of walking along the rain-soaked street, feeling the droplets on my head and back, I found myself in front of the library, a smile creeping onto my face. The library always brought me joy. There was something magical about the aroma of aged paper and the soft murmurs of books that just captivated me. As I entered the library, I greeted the woman at the front desk. She returned my greeting with a smile, although I could sense she wasn't thrilled to see me looking so drenched. I located a spot to settle down, and a few minutes later my belongings were spread out on the desk as I began working on my essay. In fact, my laptop remained tucked away in my bag while I attempted to proofread my notes before transferring them. I sighed quietly, frustrated that nothing seemed to make sense, and realized I needed some assistance. I got up and approached the front desk, inquiring if there were any history encyclopedias available that could aid me with my school essay. She informed me that all the history encyclopedias were located in the back corner of the library, and advised me to be cautious while I was there since some of the books were quite ancient. I nodded in agreement and made my way back to the corner. Upon arrival, I began to sift through the aisles, but all the books appeared to either dull or I was certain they wouldn't be of any assistance to me. Before long, I turned a corner and stumbled upon a section I hadn't seen before. It looked rather intimidating, as the overhead light was flickering and swaying back and forth. I noticed a layer of dust on the shelf, and a few bugs scurried out from the shadows, rushing past me. I glanced at all the encyclopedias and couldn't help but smile. Perhaps one of these could be useful to me, I thought, grinning. I began to pull encyclopedias off the shelf, examining their covers. Some I had read previously, while others were quite old, likely published when my mum was my age. As I pushed one encyclopedia aside, something heavy tumbled down onto my foot, causing me to cry out in pain. I quickly slapped a hand over my mouth, not wanting to disrupt the tranquility. I looked down and saw a thick, brown book lying on the ground. I bent down to pick it up and noticed it lacked any library codes or markings indicating ownership. However, I soon realized how worn and tattered it was. The spine was cracked. I dusted off the cover and read the title, which sent a shiver down my spine. Prophetic Pages. I opened the book and began flipping through the pages, each one yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes and strange symbols that seemed to dance before my eyes. As I continued to flip through the pages, I discovered that each one contained a detailed entry about the life and death of an individual. It struck me that the names were eerily familiar. They were people I knew, friends, family, acquaintances. I was in disbelief over what I was holding. When I turned to the next page, I nearly dropped the book on my feet once more. Timothy Green, age 23, dies in a car accident on April 15th, 2023. This page was dedicated to my childhood best friend, Timothy, or Tim as I called him. April 15th was tomorrow, and I could feel my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I closed the book, trying to convince myself that this was just a cruel joke. I glanced around the library, half expecting someone to jump out and shout, "Gotcha!" But the aisles were empty. The only sounds were the rain tapping against the nearby window and my heavy breathing. I came to the realization that I had to hurry home to call Tim and alert him what was going to happen. I tucked the strange book under my arm and dashed back to the desk where my belongings were. A few minutes later, I found myself sprinting down the street as fast as a guy who mainly plays video games and practices the trumpet can manage. I began to ponder a multitude of thoughts. Was any of this real? Was the book some sort of cursed object that the library had been concealing? Upon arriving home, I rushed past Mark and Mom, who were in the kitchen preparing dinner. Thankfully, I didn't hear them arguing, but I didn't have the luxury of time to deal with that right now. Once I reached my room, I tossed my bag and the Prophetic Pages book onto my desk, then grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Without delay, I dialed Tim's number, my fingers trembling as the phone rang and rang. Just when I thought he wouldn't pick it up, I heard his voice on the other end. "Dude, you need to listen to me. This is really important. You planning to go out tonight?" I asked him. Timothy excitedly explained that he was actually going to see a new horror movie that had just been released and suggested I join him if I was done being Mr. History. I took a deep breath and pleaded with him to stay home, urging him not to drive anywhere or just to remain home, safe. Tim immediately laughed, teasing me about turning into my mother. I was on the verge of telling him about that peculiar book that I'd discovered at the library, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. Just then I heard Mom calling my name, so I told Tim I had to go, and he hung up. I let out a soft sigh before glancing down at the Prophetic Pages book. Deep down I feared it might already be too late for my childhood best friend. I heard Mom calling my name again, so I set the phone back on the nightstand. I walked out of my room and saw Mum standing at the foot of the stairs. She informed me that dinner was ready and that she'd been calling me for 2 minutes, urging me to come downstairs before my food got cold. At the table, I sat there pushing my peas around my plate with a fork while Mum and Mark were engaged in conversation, but I wasn't focused on them. No, my mind was occupied with thoughts of the dangerous book from the library, Tim's disbelief, and the looming possibility of losing my best friend, either tomorrow or maybe even tonight. "Hey, little bro, what's up with you?" Mark inquired. I jumped in my seat, nearly falling out, but I managed to keep my composure because I knew if I hit the ground, Mum would treat me like a little baby. "Oh, just pondering my history essay. Found some intriguing information at the library. I think it'll help me score a good grade." Couldn't share the details about the so-called death book because neither of them would believe me, especially since Tim never believed me when I warned him about his fate. After dinner, I headed back to my room, sat on the bed, grabbed the book, and flipped to the page detailing Tim's death. I kept staring at it, wondering if it was real or if I could tear the page out and somehow prevent it from happening, like some sort of paradox. But then I remembered that this book was indeed from the library and I'd borrowed it, yet it lacked any library barcodes or scanning tags, so perhaps it didn't actually belong to the library. Well, I placed the book on my nightstand, got ready for bed. Soon I was lying in the dark bedroom thinking about Tim and the terrible car accident that awaited him on April 15th. The next morning as I woke up, sunlight streamed through my window. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and yawned. Instantly I turned around, glancing at my phone, my thoughts immediately drifting to Tim. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted him, checking if he was all right and if he'd enjoyed the movie. I anticipated a swift response, but there was nothing. Throughout the day, I kept waiting for Tim to either call or text me, but still no reply came. Panic began to creep in, and I muttered in frustration under my breath. I made the decision then to call Tim's home phone. However, instead of him picking up, it was his mother. When I inquired about Timothy's whereabouts, I heard her gasp in horror. She told me that Tim had been involved in a car accident while driving to the grocery store, and the paramedics said he didn't survive. In that moment, I felt my legs buckle beneath me. I leaned against the wall, sliding down until I collapsed onto the floor. The prophetic pages had spoken the truth, and it had come to pass. The book had foretold his death, and despite my efforts, I couldn't save my best friend from dying. The very next day, I found myself back at the library, enveloped in a fog of sorrow and disbelief, desperate to comprehend what had just transpired. I settled in the same desk as before, retrieving the book from my bag, gazing at it before I began to leaf through the yellowed pages once more. Each page contained a meticulous account of the life and death of various individuals. Some were familiar to me while others were not. Yet each entry represented a friend or family member who would meet their end in unique circumstances, all described in vivid detail. As I continued to turn the pages, I suddenly halted on one that sent a chill through my hands, almost compelling me to hurl the book across the room. Jessica Carter, age 21, dies from an aneurysm on April 16th, 2023. In that moment, I understood that this page detailed the death of my girlfriend, Jessica. A shiver coursed through me as I recalled the last time I'd seen Jessica. We were at the coffee shop sharing laughter over something silly. Without hesitation, I jumped up, stuffed the book into my bag, and fished my phone out of my pocket to dial Jessica's number. "Hey, Daniel, what's up? I'm at work right now," a voice came through. "Listen, whatever you're doing, you need to stop or head home. You're in danger." I rushed to explain about the book I'd discovered in the library, detailing how it revealed the deaths of all my friends and family, including her. I then told her I'd found Tim's name in the book, and he'd died in a car accident yesterday, just as the book predicted for that exact date. "Whoa, Daniel, I think you've been watching too many horror movies. But when you get to the restaurant, at least bring me that so-called mystical book you have, okay?" Jessica said before hanging up. I felt an urge to scream into the emptiness. I urged my feet to run, wishing I brought my car or something quicker than my clumsy feet. When I finally reached the restaurant, I doubled over, gasping for breath. As I looked up, I saw a crowd had gathered around the entrance, and confusion washed over me. Were they having a sale, or was there a fight going on? I was indifferent to the commotion. My only focus was finding Jessica to show her the book. I squeezed through the throng and entered the restaurant, where I noticed paramedics and medical personnel, along with an area cordoned off by barriers. I couldn't see what was happening due to another crowd blocking my view, so I tapped an older man on the shoulder. He turned to me, concern etched on his face. "Sir, what's going on?" "One of the workers just collapsed. The paramedics think she's dead," he replied. The moment he mentioned she, my heart plummeted. I pushed through the crowd, and there on the ground, eyes closed and lifeless, lay Jessica. "No, Jessica!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the chaos. Instantly, the paramedics and medical staff turned to me. One approached and asked if I knew her. I told her I was Jessica's boyfriend, that I'd just spoken to her on the phone moments ago, urging her to leave work because it wasn't safe. I was rambling, overwhelmed, and I stopped when the paramedic placed her hands on my shoulders. "Young man, it's okay. You should know what happened. Your girlfriend has died from an aneurysm. There was nothing we could do to save her. I'm so sorry," the paramedic said. The book felt like a dark oracle, revealing its grim secrets. I thought about showing it to this woman, but if I did, she would likely bombard me with questions I couldn't answer. So I just thanked her and, without another word, pushed past everyone and exited the restaurant, furious that this cursed book had claimed yet another person I loved. Weeks later, the unsettling pattern persisted, each page revealing the demise of a victim who was more familiar to me than Jessica. I'd become a captive to the book, unable to resist the allure of its sinister knowledge. It felt as if it understood my sorrow, with the ink appearing darker on every page. Then I stumbled upon a page that shattered my heart into countless fragments upon seeing the name of the individual. Marcus Roberts, age 23, died of a heart attack on April 30th, 2023. I realized that was tonight, once again, and I leapt out of bed, rushing to my brother's room, where I found him lacing up his shoes. "Dude, where are you going? It's almost 9 o'clock at night." "I can't sleep. Thinking about going for a late-night run. I'll be back soon." I pleaded with him not to venture outside tonight, insisting it was too perilous. Mark chuckled, saying I was becoming even more like Mom, but I was just terrified of losing my brother. Well, after an hour had passed, I found myself in the kitchen, assisting Mom in preparing her renowned double chocolate chip cookies. I could see that she appeared anxious about something. I inquired about what was troubling her, and she revealed that Mark had not returned from his walk, nor had he sent her a message as he promised he would do when he was on his way back home. I sensed what was about to unfold, and I knew I had to intervene. I looked at Mom and told her I needed to take care of something urgent, to which she simply nodded in agreement. So without another word, I quickly put on my jacket and shoes and dashed out of the house. My breath came in quick, uneven gasps as I sprinted toward the park, Mark's favorite place to walk. As I neared the park, I spotted a figure lurking in the shadows, and my heart raced in my chest. When I turned the corner, I found him lying on the ground, clutching his chest. "Mark!" I yelled. I hurried to my brother, but deep down, I already knew it was too late for him. That dreadful book had taken yet another victim. This time it was my brother. I was descending into madness. First, my 2 friends were taken from me, and then my brother. The loss of my loved ones was a heavy burden on my emotions. And that's when an idea struck me. I seized the book and made my way back to the library one last time, desperate for answers. The main librarian, an elderly woman, looked up at me with her piercing green eyes. "What is this book? Why is it causing all of this?" I then slammed the prophetic pages onto the desk. Initially, the lady remained silent, but as she took the book and examined it, her expression shifted, and she regarded me with a serious look. "Young man, where did you come across this book?" "I was here last time searching for history encyclopedias when this book fell off the shelf and landed on my foot. You still haven't answered my question. What is this book?" "Oh, that's the prophetic pages. It's always existed, young man. It chronicles the lives that are intertwined with yours and predicts not only death, but also the weight of the choices and paths we take," the librarian said. "This isn't a choice. It's a curse," I shouted in frustration. "Perhaps it is, or perhaps it isn't. But understand this. That book only reveals what is already destined. Not the cause, but rather a reflection on the choices you've made and the connections you've established," she replied. I took a step back, my mind racing. Had I somehow cursed all those deaths of my loved ones without realizing it? Was I in some way accountable for the choices they'd made or the paths they chose? "Can I change this? Is there any way to stop it?" I inquired. "The only way to put an end to this situation is to cut off the connections. But it comes at a cost, young man." The words seemed to penetrate deep within me, and without uttering a single word I turned away from the desk, leaving my book behind in the library. I came to the realization that I had to create distance from everyone I cared about. I needed to sever ties with them, even though it felt like a betrayal. It was the only way to protect them at all. In the following weeks, I dedicated my days and nights to solitude. Whenever I encountered someone I recognized, I would steer clear of them, and I ignored their calls and messages. Well, this was tortuous, yet it brought a sense of relief as I observed that no one around me was perishing, and I felt assured that my loved ones were safe. Then one day, as I went to my bedroom to indulge in some video games, I discovered the Prophetic Pages book lying on my bed. I felt as if I could melt into a puddle. I hurried over to it, picked it up, and as I examined the cover, my hands trembled while I opened the book and flipped straight to the last page. To my surprise, it was entirely blank, leaving me puzzled. Recalling what the librarian had said, I touched the paper and watched in amazement as the information began to materialize before my eyes. When I saw the name of the next person destined to die, my jaw dropped in disbelief. Daniel Roberts, 21 years old, passed away from loneliness on May 15th, 2023. The book slipped from my grasp. That date was tomorrow. I couldn't fathom it. I felt as if I might either vomit or weep like a child. The realization hit me like a massive wave. I'd been so focused on saving my friends and loved ones that I had unwittingly sealed my own doom. I needed to cut myself entirely off from everyone, even my mother, who was thankfully still alive, but, well, I was destined to become a mere ghost, a mere shadow of who I used to be. This book had twisted my intentions, transforming my wish to protect into a sentence of death. The following day, I found myself sitting alone on the floor of my bedroom, feeling the darkness creeping in, coiling around me like a serpent. I reminisced about my friends and brothers, recalling the laughter and memories we'd created together. It dawned on me that I'd forsaken them all, and in doing so I condemned only myself. Mum attempted to coax me out of my room, but nothing she said had any effect. As night descended, I sensed the air becoming thick and oppressive. Suddenly I heard whispers, likely from that dreadful book, echoing in my mind, the pages shifting as if they were alive. I let out a soft sigh, rising to my feet and moving to my nightstand where the Prophetic Pages lay. I began flipping through the book, only to find it completely blank. And that's when I realized I was about to join them. I shut the book and hurled it to the ground, confronting the horrifying truth. I had become a prisoner of my own decisions, a victim of fate. As the sudden darkness enveloped me, I finally grasped the meaning of it all. The real terror did not stem from the foretold deaths, but from the isolation I'd chosen to accept. But now it was too late. I had become a new edition of the Prophetic Pages, destined for a solitary conclusion. As I sank into the shadows, I finally understood how to escape the curse of the Prophetic Pages.
The Woman of the Inner Room. Dr. Osborne, hastily summoned to the receiving hospital, found there a handsome, well-dressed young man with an ugly hole in his skull about 1.5 inches above his left ear. The injured man evidently was not suffering, but the desperate nature of his hurt was seen in the deep pallor of his face. His expression was placid, unintelligent, and absolutely silly. Yet he was freely alive. His breathing was good, his heart observed its functions, his temperature was normal, and his skin was warm and moist. Dr. Osborne cleared the wound with a sponge. "How was the lad hurt?" he asked one of the officers who was standing about. Well, no one could tell. A few minutes ago, someone had seen him staggering along the street, clinging to the house walls to keep from falling, a thin stream of blood trickling down his face, and had pointed him out to a policeman. Dr. Osborne closely looked at the wound. Then he tried to insert a finger in the opening, but failed. He looked around upon the men and asked them to show him their hands. "No," he said after examining them. "Your fingers are all too blunt, Farley. Go and call my daughter. She's sitting in my buggy at the door." Before she came, Dr. Osborne asked, "Do you know who he is?" None could inform him. Not a scrap of paper by which he might be identified could be found upon him. The surgeon's daughter entered. She was an attractive girl, rather tall and slight. She had brown eyes and hair and carried herself with a fine, unconscious grace. She glanced at the man lying on the operating table, suddenly checked her advance, and became pale. Her father, with a reassuring manner, took her by the arm and led her forward. "Oh, don't be alarmed, Agnes," he said. "I've tested your nerve before, and have never seen it fail. Now, let me see your hand." He took it in his and examined it closely. "This is just what I need." He resumed. "Long, slender fingers. You have a beautiful hand, Agnes." Well, this embarrassed her, but she became stronger. "Now, my child, I must learn the nature of the wound in this young man's head. Come a little closer, my dear. He doesn't know what's going on. So, have you ever seen him before?" "No," she replied, approaching nearer and regarding his face steadily. "But he appears to be a man of means and refinement." "That is clear. But come closer, Agnes." "Why, you're right. Look, you see, it's a small hole, and that probably accounts for the fact that he's still alive. But it has penetrated the skull, and that makes the case a very serious one. It's necessary that I know what made the wound in order to determine what to do, and the quickest way in the world is to let the wound tell its own story. My fingers are so thick that I can do nothing, but yours are exactly suited." "My fingers? What do you want me to do, Father?" "Right. I want you to insert a finger in the wound. Tell me what you find." After a careful examination of the edges of the bone. The girl hesitated. "But why?" she asked. "So that I may know what instrument was employed. If the hole's round and has rather clean edges, it was made by a bullet, in which event there is no reasonable hope of recovery. If, however, it's three-cornered, or otherwise angular, or in any great degree ragged, and something else made it, pickaxe or some other instrument, in that case, there's a bad chance of saving his life. Besides, the knowledge will be very useful to the officers in digging up what appears to be a mysterious crime. You can ascertain that, can't you?" "I'll try." So under her father's direction, but in a gingerly manner, she stood behind the young man's head, her face close above his, and put the fine long forefinger of her left hand into the wound. As she did so, her eyes met the empty stare of his. Very slowly and carefully, watching his face all the time, she felt the edges of the bone and then withdrew her finger. "It's smooth and round," she said. "Ah," exclaimed the father. "Then there's no hope, poor fellow. But let us try a little further, Agnes, my dear. You did that bravely, as I knew you would. But now I want you to put your finger in again and push it very slowly and carefully as far as you can. The bullet may not have gone far." The girl, again looking down upon the calm, peaceful face, with its blank stare and senseless smile, explored the wound with her finger. Her touch was sure and gentle, but as her finger came in contact with the brain, and she felt its warmth and the regular and smooth pressure of the pulsations, her nerves went upon a strain. Still, she looked down into the young handsome face, but she was growing pale. All of a sudden, for some wholly unaccountable reason, the young man's blank expression and silly smile passed away, and a certain intelligence sat upon his face. The surgeon saw this, and it appeared to him to be a matter of uncommon importance. At the same moment, a peculiar look came into his daughter's face. She had begun to relax in the course of fainting, but instantly she swung back upon a nervous balance which was so prominent as to suggest a strong stimulation. The young man looked up into her eyes with a vague interest. She looked down into his with fear and horror. And then she suddenly withdrew her finger and stepped back beyond the range of his vision. The look of vacuity again took a hold upon it. The girl, without addressing anyone particularly, said, nervously and hurriedly, "You'd better send to the bank and tell his father." "What bank?" asked her father in surprise. "The Citizens' Bank." "Who is his father?" "Mr. Blanchard, the president of the bank. This is his son, Charles." Her father regarded her with amazement, but he refrained from asking her questions. He merely remarked, "But you said just now that you did not know him." The girl looked confused and made no reply. The surgeon sent an officer to the bank. His attention then returned to the patient, and as his daughter had not made as thorough an examination as he desired, he asked her if she felt strong enough to make another attempt. She complied, but with much hesitation. Again, a sickness and weakness assailed her as her finger slipped into the wound, and again the young man's face brightened. He fixed his eyes on her face, seemingly in recognition, and in a thick, stammering voice he said, "Why, Agnes, is it you? So you are the one. This is what jealousy has done. This is what I get for being his friend." "Do you blame me, Charles?" "Why should I? It's too late for that now." "Does Frank know?" "He does not, but she is madly in love with him." "And she's a stranger to you?" "Absolutely. I never saw her before. I believe he has her in hiding, and that he'll shield her." "But he's not a traitor." She may have some unaccountable hold upon him."
"He would not deceive me so."
"Well, who can tell?"
All the excitement, which had kept back the encroachment of weakness, now failed its purpose. The girl withdrew her finger, and the young man sank back into his former lethargic condition. All colour fled the girl's face. Her eyes were fixed vacantly in a stare of horror. "Agnes," said her father, approaching her hastily, "what's the matter? Are you faint?" I don't know, Father." She trembled as though with apoplexy. "What is all that he's been telling you?" he asked. She was far too gone to reply, but her father mistook her weakness for hesitation. "Come into the open air, my child. This repulsive ordeal and the ravings of that delirious man have borne too heavily upon your nerves. Come, my daughter." Those were his words, but a great dread had arisen within him. As soon as they'd stepped out, he pressed the question upon her with a certain hardness which came from his anxiety. "What does this all mean? What do you know about the shooting?" Her voice was kept back by a gasp, and with a lurch she slipped from her father's grasp and went all disorganized down to the ground before he could save her. He picked her up, placed her in the buggy, and drove rapidly to his home. When she recovered, she found her mother in anxious watch upon her, for her father had gone to see what could be done for the wounded man. Mrs. Osborne had been informed by her husband of the singular occurrence at the receiving hospital, and the good woman was unhappy over it. But with her usual flair of tact, she asked no questions, believing that the close understanding between her and her daughter would bring forth an explanation in safe time. She was disappointed, therefore, when Agnes, upon coming into consciousness, spoke no word of the most important matter. More than that, she said she had a grievous headache and desired to be left alone, that she might sleep.
Mrs. Osborne withdrew, and immediately the girl went to the task of slipping away from the house unseen. And she did this with complete success. In a few minutes she was in the office of a young physician named Frank Armour. Well, there was nothing commonplace in this young man's appearance. He was tall, slender, and pale, and to the manifest effects of rigorous study was added evidence of some kind of trouble that was wearing him out. He occupied 2 rooms, a reception room and, behind it, a consultation room. She found him sitting in the front room. The door leading into the other was closed. His face brightened greatly when he saw her standing before him. "Agnes," he cried, "I'm very glad to see you. All loads drop from my shoulders when your sweet face appears. Well, you said the other day that you weren't coming to the office anymore, for fear that people would talk about you, as though that should make any difference, seeing that we're soon to be married." His manner was so gentle, so full of evidence of genuine affection, that her suspicions concerning him were much weakened. But she'd come to make sure of her position, and the mysteries of the wounded man's speech had to be cleared up. "Frank," she asked, "have you seen your friend Charles Blanchard today?" "No, I haven't seen him since last night. He scolded me again for not taking him around to your house and introducing him to you. Now really, Agnes, I don't think you ought to be putting me off about bringing him, as he really is a very delightful man, and I'm sure you'd like him. We'll talk about that some other time, Frank. There's something else I want to ask you now. Do you really think you love me, and me alone?" "I'm certain of it, Agnes, but I don't see any reason for such a question. I know that you never go into society, and you've told me that you pay attention to no one except me." "Oh, that's the truth, Agnes. But to save my life, I don't understand you. You're pale and ill. Something's happened to give you trouble, and you've suddenly become suspicious of me." Should she tell him of the fatal wounding of his best friend? Was it not possible first to extort from him some explanation of that friend's singular disclosures? The fact that she'd received this knowledge from him, if indeed knowledge it was, troubled her greatly. The man had sown distrust in her mind, and it was like poison. "Frank," she said presently, unable to see him longer in ignorance of his friend's condition, "Charles Blanchard has been seriously hurt, and I came to tell you." "Seriously hurt?" asked Armour in alarm. "When? And how?" "He was found less than 2 hours ago and taken to the receiving hospital, where my father's attending to him now." The young physician was now upon his feet, nervous and excited. "How was he hurt, Agnes? Tell me all about it." "Nothing's known except that he was found staggering along the street with a pistol wound in the head." Armour's face was now livid, and his trembling legs nearly failed to support his weight. "He was not killed instantly?" he asked. "No, but he is unconscious." "Well, certainly." "Well, the bullet must have been a small one." No doubt, cried the unhappy man. "Well, I must go see him at once." He picked up his hat and was starting away, expecting her to leave the room with him. But she sat still, remarking, "I'll wait until you return, if you promise to come back soon." Armour's disappointment and annoyance were visibly manifest. He shot a quick glance toward the door of the adjoining room, and then walked over to it and cautiously tried the knob. The door was locked. He made a show of feeling in his pocket for the key, but his whole manner was so openly embarrassed that the sharp-sighted girl noticed it. "Agnes," he said, turning upon her somewhat impatiently, "there's no doubt I shall be gone a long time, and it would be unreasonable for me to ask you to wait. Nevertheless," she said, in a rather hard tone, looking him steadily in the eyes, "I will stay here and wait for you. If you stay away long, I'll turn on the spring latch and lock the door when I leave." An evident fear seized upon the young physician. He was anxious to go to his suffering friend, and was unwilling to leave Agnes in his office. She saw all this very clearly. "And, by the way, Frank," she resumed, "as I'm very tired, I'll go into the back room and rest on the lounge." She started toward the door, pretending not to have noticed that it was locked, and tried to open it. "Why, it's locked!" she exclaimed. Armour's uneasiness had increased to a positive suffering. Yes," he stammered. "Is anyone in there?" "Agnes, well, you're acting in a strange and unaccountable way today." "I?" she asked in great astonishment. "I don't understand you, Frank." Then she walked straight up to him and, placing her hands on his shoulders, said, with dignity and tenderness, "I merely asked you if there was anyone in the room, and you're offended. Let's be candid with each other, Frank. What does it mean?" I may have a patient in that room, and A low moaning in a woman's voice, indistinctly heard from the inner room, interrupted him. His face turned scarlet and then pale, and all the time the steady gaze of the surgeon's daughter was upon him. She took her hands from his shoulders, looking much humiliated, and, with a painful sadness which he had never seen before in her conduct, she simply said, "I don't think it's customary for physicians to lock their patients up, but if I've been rude, I beg you to forgive me. I'll not annoy you by staying. Goodbye, Frank." She extended her hand, which he seized eagerly, but she quickly withdrew it and left the room. He followed her into the passageway. "Agnes," he said, "surely you don't suspect that—" But she was already fleeing down the stairs so rapidly that he could not finish this foolish sentence. And the girl went so quickly along the crowded street that people turned in wonder to look at her. Her eyes were filled with tears, her face was very pale, and her lips were tightly caught between her teeth. "I never would have dreamed it," she said to herself over and over. "Never, never. It will kill me, it will kill me." She re-entered her home as secretly as she left it, flung herself wearily upon her bed, and cried as though her heart were broken. The police had gone intelligently about their work upon the mystery of the shooting. Mr. Blanchard, the father of the wounded man, had arrived, overcome with grief and horror. Dr. Armour, he said, was the only intimate friend his son had. He was entirely unable to suggest any cause for the shooting, which undoubtedly had not been done with a suicidal hand. Police repeated to him all that they could remember of the disjointed and unintelligible conversation between his son and Agnes Osborne, and this account puzzled him greatly. What mysterious bind was there between his son and this young woman? Well, she denied all knowledge of him, yet she gave the information of his identity. When and how had he been her friend, not knowing her? Why had she discovered an anxiety that he should not blame her for the deed that would cost him his life? Why was she desirous of learning from him whether Frank Armour knew anything about the tragedy? And who was this who was madly in love with Armour, and what possible connection could there be between this fact and that of the shooting? Who was the woman referred to in their conversation, and why should Armour keep her in hiding? How could her jealousy of young Blanchard be the moving cause of this desperate assault? Mr. Blanchard was not the only one who tried to bring some light out of the darkness of all this singular and deplorable transaction. A broken-hearted girl, tossing and weeping on her bed, asked herself these questions, some of them many times, and the police were weighing them with all the care and precision of trained hunters of crime. Though with Dr. Osborne the matter was far more serious than with the police. Lacking his knowledge that the young man's temporary restoration to a state of consciousness was not explainable on any ordinary grounds, they didn't see the true value of the fact Dr. Osborne reasoned that a wound of that character must necessarily produce a disorganization of the mental functions and present a condition of unconsciousness. And this had been the case until his daughter had inserted her finger into the wound, when at once the sufferer's face brightened, and a condition resembling consciousness ensued. Dr. Osborne was too wise to assume that young Blanchard's ability to speak and apparently carry forward a conversation was positive evidence of consciousness, for he knew that the vagaries of a disorganized mind are of unimaginable variety. But this case was unique. Nothing in the books or his experience had a suggestion of its form or colour. The whole case was this. His daughter had displayed fright upon seeing the wounded man at the station, but had recovered from that, and indeed her condition might have been construed as one of natural repugnance, overcome by an intelligent direction of the will. And it was clear enough so far. When she placed her finger in the edge of the wound, there was sign neither of recognition on her part, nor consciousness on his. It was only when she pushed her finger into the brain that those two facts came into existence. This appeared to the surgeon to be a very strange coincidence. Not only was the young man apparently restored to consciousness, but the two, supposed to have been strangers, recognized each other and, worse than all else, betrayed a certain ill-defined common knowledge of the crime. All these things threw Dr. Osborne into the most conflicting surmises and brought him into a condition of positive unhappiness. The extraordinary scientific features of the case were overshadowed by his anxieties. His daughter had engaged herself, with his assistant, to marry Dr. Armour, and yet this young physician had been placed in a peculiar light by the words of the dying man. Prolonged thinking brought only wider distraction, and the unhappy father determined to question his daughter, depending on the close sympathy between them to bring the whole truth out of her. It was some time, however, before he could find the opportunity. Mr. Blanchard had removed his son to his home, and had retained Dr. Osborne to attend to him. When the surgeon had done all that was possible, he went to his home and sought his daughter. But she could not be found. After nearly crying her heart out upon her return from Armour's office, she got up, brought herself under control, and then realized that she had been treated shamefully by the man whom she loved above all others in the world. It was easy for her grief to become shame, and her shame to become anger. It was not possible for her yet to think seriously upon any plan that might bring suffering or ruin to her lover. But it was within her power to work serious mischief to some mysterious woman who had come between her and him, and this was a matter to be attended to. Accordingly, she cleared up her face, made herself very bright and pretty, and went at once to consult the chief of police. That functionary was vastly surprised to see her. He had been given a full report of the scene at the receiving hospital, and when he saw the girl enter his office looking so bright, confident, and handsome, and announce her name and mission, well, he was perplexed. In truth, Chief Holloway had certain ideas which would have given Miss Agnes discomfort if she had known of their existence. "I've come to ask you, Mr. Holloway," she said, "if you've made any discoveries concerning the shooting of Mr. Blanchard." The officer, somewhat taken aback by her directness, tried, after a heavy fashion, to cover his position under some remarks in which discretion was outlined as a duty. "But this is a rather singular question from you, Miss Osborne, considering that you yourself are supposed to know all about the matter." Well, the very boldness and brutality of this assault served an excellent purpose. For the girl, not dreaming that her talk with young Blanchard had taken wings, or that anyone suspected her of the knowledge, was shocked with surprise. "Well, what makes you think that?" she quickly asked. This put him in command of the situation, for he now felt his power. "Your conversation with the young Blanchard showed that both you and he knew all about it, and then, after you left him, you went to see Dr. Armour, who also appears to be pretty badly mixed up in the whole affair. All this came like a whirlwind, and badly frightened the girl. Now," resumed Holloway, "although you have come ostensibly to make inquiries, I think your ultimate purpose was to give some very important information, and I should be pleased to hear it." Agnes caught her breath. "How can I know anything?" she asked, realizing that her time had come, but with a rush that unnerved her. "Well, Mr. Blanchard spoke in a rambling way." "When he was not as evasive as you are at this moment." "Evasive? Really, sir?" "This is no time for byplay," the officer sternly interrupted. No doubt you understand you yourself are in a very peculiar position. If what you know would endanger your own safety by you telling it, I can easily understand your feelings. Well, the sting was felt, but the girl rallied and gave this opinion. You said something just now that makes me think you suspect Dr. Armour of having a guilty knowledge of the affair. If you mean by that to charge him with the crime, well, you're entirely in error. But you are careful not to deny that he knows something of importance. Why do you not say openly that you and Armour know who fired the shots, and that you two, possibly for prudential reasons, are doing all you can to conceal your knowledge and shield the criminal? Well, the very brutality and directness of this question roused the inmost nature of the girl. With scarlet face and flashing eyes, she said, "If you'll come with me, I will show you the murderer." Well, this was a windfall that Holloway had not dared to hope for. He promptly followed Agnes. When they reached the street, she said, "It'll be necessary to see Dr. Armour first, and I think he's at Mr. Blanchard's. We'll go there first." "As you please." They found both Dr. Armour and Dr. Osborne at the young man's house. The two physicians, the father and the lover, were vastly surprised to see Agnes and the chief of police walk in together. And for her part, Agnes felt so guilty that she couldn't bear to look Armour full in the face. Well, she felt that a wild jealousy had led her to take a desperate and dangerous step, the end of which she could not foresee. But did her lover really deserve to be spared? Had he not deceived her shamefully? The young man felt that a high barrier had come between him and Agnes, and he had nothing to say to her. Holloway readily saw that a heavy constraint rested upon them both, and it appeared, in his eyes, an important affair. "Agnes," said her father, taking her by the hand, and looking her anxiously in the eyes, "where have you been?" "To see Mr. Holloway, father." "For what purpose?" "To learn if he discovered anything." This was not the place for pressing the matter, and so her father asked her no more questions. There was a moment of general embarrassment among the four persons in the room. It was broken by the chief, who asked that, in the cause of justice, Miss Osborne be permitted to repeat the experiment of inserting her finger in the wound. With surprising alacrity, both the physicians objected, saying that the wound had been dressed, that the sufferer was then very low from shock, and that such an experiment would likely have a fatal issue. Holloway smiled in a peculiar manner, and, looking steadily at Armour, added, "I hardly expected that you'd consent." This thrust cut the young man to the quick, and he shot a look at Agnes that revealed his suspicion of her hand in the policy of the officer. "Of course, I have no desire to increase the young man's danger," remarked Holloway, "but the result of the former experiment was so important that I deemed it advisable to repeat it, if possible. However, I think it's hardly necessary. As soon as I'd learned all the particulars of that experiment, I laid them before a prominent physician of this city, and requested his written opinion concerning them. I think this is the proper time to inform you concerning it, for several reasons which will appear later." Thereupon, Holloway read an ingenious paper, only a short extract from which can be set forth here. It is as follows. "Admitting a wide latitude for deception on the part of the young woman, and the possibility of error in your accounts, the whole affair seems preposterous and not worthy of serious attention. But we shall treat it, not as a fact, but as a hypothetical case." The hypothesis was here stated in agreement with the reported facts, and this explanation followed. The bullet was small, and hence the laceration on the brain matter was not extensive, nor the primary shock very great. The unconsciousness observed apparently resulted from the severing of the nerves ramifying throughout the brain, and from the rupturing of the innumerable chains of brain cells in the path of the bullets. Now, these lacerations, by destroying the continuity of the brain texture, disorganize the mind by interrupting the coordination of its functions. Now, if some plan could be devised for bringing together the severed ends of tissue in such a manner as would permit of their resuming their normal occupation of transmitting molecular activity, there is a rare possibility that its employment would have restored consciousness. By a very singular accident, the young woman may have performed that service when she inserted her finger deep into the brain. But in order for this result to have been accomplished, a most extraordinary series of events must have occurred. Now, the finger is a sensitive member, from the fact that it contains so large a number of nerves. And these nerves, called peripheral, terminate under a thin cuticle, through which sensation easily is experienced. When her finger was inserted in the brain tissue, her nerve ends came approximately in contact with the severed nerves of the brain over the entire field of laceration. Thus, the mechanical condition of nerve continuity was restored in the brain of the wounded man, and consciousness was the result. But it's evident that the molecular transmission did not occur directly through her finger. And that was not possible, for the reason that her nerves do not run straight through her finger from one side to the other. Well, if we should trace one of these nerves, we should find that, starting at the termination in the finger, it runs up the arm and into the brain. The sensation, starting from the end and going to the brain, would there meet and be assimilated by a large number of other sensations, this being the result of coordination. The brain would then decide what action to take, and then would direct the efferent or outrunning nerves to move the muscles with a definite purpose. It is clear, then, that the movement of sensation through the wounded man's brain tissue after the restoration of continuity must have become communicated to the nervous system of the woman. In other words, no sensation could pass through his brain without passing through hers also. In this way, their two brains would act largely as one, and the active thoughts of one would be known to the other. By this sort of reasoning, we may account for the fact that, although the two persons were strangers to each other, mutual recognition came when the knowledge of both became the possession of each. Hence we must infer that the young woman knows as much concerning the person who did the shooting as does the wounded man himself. Now, the effect of this extraordinary document can hardly be imagined. From Dr. Osborne it lifted a load that was likely to crush him. But why had not his daughter been candid with him? Now that there could no longer be a fair suspicion that she had any criminal association with the crime, why had she acted in so strange a manner? Lama's thoughts took a very different turn. His pallor increased until it became alarming, and his knees were unsteady from weakness. The man's agony was so painfully visible that Agnes felt a fearful dread for the end that must come. The immediate result of all this was that the three men fixed a steady gaze upon her, in which was a commingling of peculiar motives and sensations. "Miss Osborne," Holloway said, finally, "this scientific report leads us to believe that you are fully aware of the identity of the one who fired the shots. In corroboration of these conclusions, you have confessed your knowledge by offering your services to point out the murderer to me. Would you be so kind as to keep your promise?" All that was womanly in the girl found cause both for alarm and encouragement in this situation. Against her sense of wrong weighed that of tenderness and affection. She found courage to look Armour squarely in the face, hoping to receive some sign that he might guide her. But she found, as she read his expression, only contempt and defiance struggling through the cloud of anguish which sat upon him. "I will keep my promise," she said with much firmness. "We'll now go to Dr. Armour's office." Besides becoming somewhat more rigid, as though bracing himself to meet some fearful ordeal, Armour betrayed no emotion. Dr. Osborne appeared to be overcome with astonishment and anxiety. Chief Holloway only smiled. These four went at once to Armour's office in utter silence, each feeling the imminence of a catastrophe. The young physician admitted them into the outer room and then closed the door. With great abruptness, he then asked this question: "Will someone be kind enough to explain the object of this visitation?" Holloway was on the point of speaking, but Agnes stepped in before him, and, looking Armour firmly in the face, said, "I believe that the person who committed this crime is concealed in your consultation room. If I'm wrong, heaven will punish me as I deserve. So far as I'm able to discover, no reason exists why I should pretend to deny the knowledge which I have. The murderer is a woman, and you're concealing and shielding her in that room." Armour, though pale as death, did not flinch before this accusation. On the contrary, his chest expanded, his eyes flashed, and, with head thrown back, he said, "It was a woman who did the shooting, as I now believe, and it is true that she, at this moment, is kept in concealment by me in the inner office. I'd hoped to be able to conceal her act from the world, but for if ever there was an occasion for the exercise of the noblest human traits, it is in the case before us. Let me tell you something. You who mistake suspicion for skill in unearthing crime, and you who are moved by even less worthy motives, crime cannot exist in the absence of accountability. Has it occurred to you to imagine that this woman may not have been responsible for her act? Do you know what an epileptic fit is? Surely you do, Dr. Osborne. You're familiar with the strange forms which this disease may take. You know that the sweetest natures are at times wholly perverted by it, that its manifestations are complex and obscure, that sometimes, instead of the violent spasms with which we are all familiar, the malady takes the form of mental and physical activity, in which we find an impulse to commit extraordinary acts as the result of monstrous misconceptions. And when this condition occurs, all the principles of the victim's nature may be wholly eclipsed, consciousness entirely suppressed, and the power to discriminate between right and wrong completely lost. After the attack is past, there remains no recollection of what was done during its continuance. Well, I inform you, and I am able to prove my assertion, that the woman who shot my dearest friend is now in my inner office, that she came to me from a distant city only yesterday to be treated for this very malady, that very soon after her arrival I informed her, as was my duty and pleasure, that I was engaged to marry a very charming and kind-hearted young lady. Oh, it is a breach of delicate confidence on my part to inform you that, in spite of a brave effort to appear glad for my good fortune, she could not conceal a certain unhappiness, which I know was perfectly natural. But it is my duty now to tell you everything. I now know that the sorrow which my news caused her brought on an attack of what is known as masked epilepsy, to which she is subject. The thing uppermost in her mind was that someone was dearer to me than she was. Although normally a woman of unexampled sweetness and goodness, she determined in her condition of temporary insanity to kill that person. I need not inform you that she must have started out with a clear purpose of killing the young lady to whom I was engaged. But she knew also that young Blanchard was my dearest friend, and, in her wild mental condition, she happened to find him fast, and she fired into his brain the bullet that was intended for another. The man paused a while, but he did not cast a glance at Agnes, who, feeling unaccountably faint at these strange revelations, had sunk helpless upon a chair. "Mr. Holloway," resumed Armour, "I ask your promise that you will not arrest this woman now, but that you take proper steps to verify my assertions. And as she's recovered from the attack and has no recollection whatsoever of the tragedy, you say nothing to her about it now, and that you never mention it to a soul if you find that what I've told you is true." "I cheerfully give those two promises," said Holloway. "Then," said Armour, "I'll present the lady to you." And with that he went to the door of the inner room, unlocked it, and stepped within. In the next moment he returned, supporting on his arm a pale, sweet-faced, beautiful woman of 50, in whose sad and gentle face was no trace of the fearful thing she had done. Armour, with his head thrown back and glowing with all the pride of a gentleman, thus presented her. "Miss Osborne, gentlemen, I have the honor to make you acquainted with my mother."
Okay, so I really hope you enjoyed those two stories this evening. I know a lot of you don't really like it that much when I do a short story, 25, 30 minutes long. I don't really get a lot of views on it. But there's some really good stuff out there, and a lot of you share awesome stories with me at Dr. Creepypasta's Vault, the subreddit I set up so you could share the stories and I could read them. And I do feel a bit guilty because it's, quite a lot of time can go past without me actually doing any stories from there that you've submitted. So I was really keen to do that today with an intriguing little one there to begin with. So, thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say? And as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Now, it's been a hot one here today, 30 plus degrees here in Maastricht. So, yeah, I'm done. That is more than enough time in my recording studio for the day. So, beer o'clock, I think. Well, till the next time, my dear friends, which may be tomorrow, probably Wednesday. Sleep well, have lovely dreams and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.